Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all 20 of you. My name is Ben Hammersley, and I'm a futurist. So one of the things that I do with my career is try to teach people how to deal with the future, how to think about the ideas that are affecting our lives. I try and help organizations and individuals, governments, militaries around the world to think about how they're going to rearrange their activities for the next 10 or 20 years. And the way that I do that is I try and think about the trends that have been happening for the previous few years and extrapolate them forward. Now, the way I do that is by thinking about the forces that are driving technology. And the most important force, the most important thing to think about if you're thinking about the future is to think about the work of this man. This is a man called Gordon Moore. He was the co-founder of Intel, you know, the people who make the microchips. And in 1963, he wrote a memo inside Intel where he said there was an interesting pattern emerging in their products. He found that for the same amount of money, every year they could fit twice as many components onto a microchip. So in 1960, for $100, you could maybe put 1,000 components onto a microchip. And in 1961, 2,000. And in 1962, 4,000, 8,000, 16,000, and so on. We looked at this in the 60s, and it was true, and in the 70s, it was still true, and in the 80s, it was true. The 90s, 2000s, it's true today, and we think it will continue for another 20 years or so. We call this Moore's Law. Probably everybody here has heard of it. The way that we talk about it now is this. For a given price, computing power doubles every year. Everybody understands this idea. Everybody in this room has lived underneath Moore's Law for their entire lives. It's the phenomenon that means that every September, Tim Cook of Apple will stand on stage and instantly make everybody's phone terrible by announcing the next year's one. Now, there's an alternative way of saying this, which is this. For a given amount of computing power, the price halves every year. And the first thing I want to tell you today is that without understanding those two rules, you will never understand the way that the world is going to operate in the next few years. You'll never be able to understand the future if you don't understand the implications of Moore's Law. Now that's quite a shocking thing. This is a picture of an iPhone 7, which was announced this year. The iPhone 7 is 250 times as powerful as an iPhone 1. The iPhone 8 will be 500 times as powerful as an iPhone 1. The iPhone 9 will be 1,000 times as powerful. So every year, technology doubles in power. This is the first time in human history that we've ever had a technology, we've ever had tools which double in power, that get twice as good every year. If you think back to the old days, you know, swords and horses, a sword didn't get twice as sharp every year. Horses didn't get twice as fast every year. Now, the reason for this is we use digital technology to design the next generation of digital technology. You don't use a sword to make another sword. You use a horse to make another horse, that's true, but after a while they stop getting any faster. Now this is an important thing to understand. because it has enormous implications for the world. Let me give you an example. This is the Human Genome Project in about 1994. The Human Genome Project was an enormous scientific experiment involving thousands of scientists around the world and billions of dollars to sequence the genome, the genetics of one individual. As you can see, this is just one of the many laboratories which was doing this experiment. And each one of those machines is a very powerful computer, and they were using it to sequence just one person. And it took maybe 10 years to do. Today, if you wanted to sequence a single person's genome, you would use one of these. That's a normal-sized hand. It's a technology called a minion. It's about this big. And it costs $1,000. So in roughly 20 years, to do genetic testing, we've gone from equipment which is the size of this room and many billions of dollars to a piece of technology about the size of your phone, which costs $1,000. This creates a massive introduction of new capabilities into the world. Now that's this year. If you want to do genetic testing next year, you can buy one of these from the same company. This is called a smidgen. And it's the same thing, but it plugs into the bottom of your iPhone. Because next year, the technology will be twice as powerful. And so they can make it half the size. Now, why am I showing you this when we're in a conference about transit and cities and all of that? Well, the reason is because the same technology, which is driving all of the changes that you'll hear about today in this room and the other rooms, is driving change in every aspect of human existence. Every part, everything that you do is being driven by this same technological change. And so we can't think about transport or ticketing or payments or transit or urban planning or any of those things without also thinking about the radical changes that are happening to the rest of the world because of that technology. And those radical changes are enormous. Moore's law says that they double. It doesn't matter where you start. The next year it doubles, and the year after that it doubles again and doubles again and doubles again. And so the acceleration of capabilities is massive. Many people find this incredibly terrifying. As we have seen this year, many countries around the world are finding the implications of technology to have major political effects. I'm an Englishman, a pro-European Englishman, and a liberal who lives in America. So I've had massive political shocks over the past few months. And most of those political shocks, Brexit and the Trump presidency, have happened because voters in those countries, in Britain and in America, have been heavily influenced by the changes to society that have been brought about by these new technologies. And so again, when we're thinking about something as important as transit and urban planning, we're thinking about something which is really touching everybody. And at the same time, those people are being touched by that technology in other ways. Let me give you an example. It's quite obvious. This is the Google self-driving car. Google can make amazing software, but they really can't design cars very well. But nevertheless, this is on the road in California. I live in Los Angeles, and sometimes you see these, but you see a lot of them in San Francisco. They work really well. Sort of a science fiction thing. 2 years ago, we never thought this happen, and now they're everywhere. And of course, it's not just a prototype from Google, it's things like Tesla. And there are thousands of Teslas on the road now, all driving themselves. But the self-driving car isn't really about the self-driving car. It's actually about the self-driving truck. The truck is the most important thing with that technology. Especially in America. The role of the car in American culture is so important. The freedom of being able to get in your car and drive somewhere, the symbolism of it is too important to American culture. But trucks, making those self-driving makes a lot of sense. You know, today, if you're a truck driver, you can only drive for 8 hours a day. And so most of the time, a truck isn't really moving. But if you make it self-driving, it could be driving for 24 hours a day, which means that the supply chains are much shorter and much faster. It makes the economy go much more quickly. It means that things in the shops are cheaper. Food is cheaper, clothes are cheaper. And so the market economy will say that we want this. And then, of course, the artificial intelligences, which drive these trucks, are better drivers than humans. And so these are safer, especially in cities. They don't kill cyclists as often. And so we're talking now about the introduction of self-driving trucks. But this is a picture from Mercedes of their self-driving truck. But as you can see, it's not a real picture. It's a rendering. It's a fake picture. So usually when I show people this, they say, well, okay, it'll happen sometime in the future. Who knows when? But of course, almost a year ago, in Europe, we started experimenting with real self-driving trucks. This is a picture from the experiment where they took these 3 trucks and drove them from the top of Norway down to Spain. Or they drove themselves from Norway to Spain. And again, that's an experiment. So sometimes you might look at that and think, well, this will happen in 5 years' time. 1 month ago, this happened. This is a self-driving truck which delivered Budweiser beer from the brewery near Chicago to a distribution center 300 miles away. There was no driver inside that. It drove itself. And the company that made the truck is a company called Otto. Otto was bought by Uber, the taxi company, at the beginning of this year. And so Uber, who are in, pretty much every country in the world now, are starting to do self-driving trucks. But that's a real problem, actually. Because we're realizing that there's a certain class of job, a certain type of employment, which is about to become extinct. There are people out there today that we are starting to call meat puppets. A meat puppet is somebody who is just keeping their seat warm, waiting for a computer to take their job. A truck driver is a meat puppet. They're just waiting for the computers to come along. A taxi driver is a meat puppet. There's no reason why a taxi should be driven by a human. A bus driver, same again. So, while these technologies, which will enable amazing transit and amazing urban planning, while these technologies are coming along and making the world look really good, offering a beautiful future, at the same time, there are enormous areas of our economies which are very vulnerable to those changes. In the United States, the truck driving industry and all of the other industries that are reliant on it employ around 15 to 20 million people. The vast majority of those will lose their jobs over the next 20 years because there's no reason for a human to be doing that. At the same time, we talk a lot about smart cities. Many of the sessions in this conference, on this stage and in the other rooms, are talking about using technology to optimize your city. Using Moore's law-driven technology, cheaper and cheaper, faster and faster technology, to monitor the city and enable you to make decisions about how to run the city. The two technologies are the same. The technology that enables smart cities and the technology which enables computers to take people's jobs are the same technologies. You can't have one without the other. In fact, we're starting to realize that the technologies that we have today, which will enable things like self-driving trucks, will give city governments and urban planners and transit authorities, people in this room, enormous superpowers. I can give you an example of this. IBM have an artificial intelligence that you can rent. You can use your credit card and you can buy it. And it has many, many different superpowers that it gives you. One of the ones that it gives you is this. It's called the tone analyzer. You can have IBM's artificial intelligence listen to your phone calls, listen to a call center maybe, and it will tell you how angry or how happy the person on the other end of the phone is. Which means that you can have that listening to all of your customers, and you can use IBM's computer to take the most angry people and send them to those people, and the happiest people and send them to those people, so on. An incredible piece of technology, almost magical piece of artificial intelligence that takes away quite a few people's jobs at the same time. So this brings us to an interesting problem. As these technologies get better and better, they enable us to manage more and more things within a city, within a transit system, within an organization. And so we're more and more likely to use them. But when you do that, you realize that there becomes a problem. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I was working for a city in a Scandinavian country. I won't say where, but it was a small town, a university town of maybe 300,000 people. And it's a very, very beautiful town. And it's in Scandinavia, so all of the people there are incredibly beautiful as well. Everyone is very tall and very good looking. And there's a university, so they're all quite young. And because it's in Scandinavia, they like to go on bicycles everywhere they go. They cycle everywhere. The traffic, even though it's on bicycles, the traffic is quite bad in the mornings. And so the mayor and the town council decided that they needed to have a smart city solution. They would take all this technology that you're familiar with, they would place it around the city, and they would use that to manage the traffic. This city also has many, many cafes and bakeries and street cafes, places where you could sit and eat pastries and drink coffee in the morning on your way to work. It's very famous for it. So they spent lots and lots of money on a smart city technology, and they installed it, and they monitored all the traffic on every street, and they timed all of the traffic lights, and they changed the bus routes, and they did all of the things that you would do to optimize your city. And when they did that, they found that everybody was made incredibly unhappy. The traffic was better, but everybody was miserable. Everybody was very sad. And so we investigated why. We wanted to know what was happening. Why was it that when we used this smart city technology, it made everybody in the city sad? And the reason, we realized, was because the software that was running the smart city was written in Texas. And in Texas, everybody drives to work. And so the optimized city in Texas is one where the commute time is as short as possible. You don't want to be in your car for very long. And so the software, the algorithm in the software, optimized for speed to get you from home to work as fast as possible. But in this town, people cycle to work down streets with trees and cafes and beautiful people. And so the optimized journey for them was not as fast as possible. The optimized journey for them was to go past as many pretty girls on bicycles as they could find, or to be going past a cafe when the pastries were coming out of the oven, or to go down a street when the leaves were just the perfect shade in the autumn. Instead of optimizing for speed of commute, we should have been optimizing for beauty or romance or poetry or inspiration or something like that. But the person who wrote the software lives in Texas and there is nothing beautiful there. And so they didn't think of doing the same thing. So we realized that you can't just assume that the optimization you're making is good for the citizens. And then we realized that no matter how good that technology was, as soon as the technology worked, it stopped being a technological problem, and it became a political problem. This happens with every technology. You have technology which is magical, something when you see it for the first time, but very soon it stops being magical and it becomes social. It becomes something to do with politics. We realized that the citizens in this particular city were very educated, very technologically understanding. They all had smartphones, they were all online, they all understood this. They knew what was happening. They understood why it was happening. But they rejected it because they didn't like the social effect that was that it caused. And when people don't like the social effect technology causes, they go slightly crazy. The mayor almost lost his job. The city council almost lost power. There was almost a revolution in that town because we changed the way that people got to work in the mornings. You can see that at a city level, and you can see it on a country level, like we have in the UK and the United States. So this is my message for you today. You have to be aware that the technological capabilities you have that are enabling you to do all of these amazing things that you've spoken about on this stage and in the other rooms are also increasing in every other sphere of people's lives. And they are causing people to be scared. And for many people, being scared is very rational, because many people are going to lose their jobs, lose their livelihoods because of this technology. And so everything we talk about today that's to do with technology has a downside as well. And the only way that you can solve that downside is by engaging with the citizens in your town, in your city, and finding out what is most important to them. Find what the problems that they want solving are, and then creating solutions to your local problems, not just bringing in some technology from America or somewhere else to optimize in the way that the Americans would think would be best. If you can do that, you will continue a tradition, as you have here in Istanbul, of having a wonderful world-class city. But if you misapply the technology, or you don't understand the social implications that the technological revolution is having in every other part of people's lives, then you will create a disaster and many, many enemies. Thank you very much. There's going to be some questions. Okay.
Değerli misafirler, değerli görüşler için Ben Hammersley'e teşekkür ediyoruz. Ve teknoloji paneline geçmeden az evvel birkaç sorumuz olacak. I would like to thank dear Mr. Ben Hammersley, and I want to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
And what do you think about digital transformation of cities?
So, I mean, as I was just saying, I think it's very risky that a city is made up of its people. So you have to respect the individuals in the city. You have to respect the population of the city more than the technology. If you decide to just throw technology on top of them, they will reject it. But if you allow people to build the technology up from underneath, then I think you'll have a successful implementation.
And the other,
okay.
Do you think big data could change the policy of the city management?
Yes. Yes, obviously. I mean, the only way that you can understand what is happening in a big complex system like a city is to use big data. But that doesn't get you all of the way. You have to be talking to the people as well and trying to understand the social implications and the political implications of these changes, as well as the big data quantifiable changes too.
Thank you. And the last one, what is your opinion about Istanbul vision for the future trends?
You know, I'm just hoping that we get to the end of next year without something else really terrible happening. So,
what else?
You know, so my job is making predictions, and if you look at the history of prediction making, in the 60s, people could think 20 or 30 years in the future. And then after 1989, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that became 10 years. After 2001 and 9/11, you could only think maybe 5 years ahead. And because of technology and Moore's law, we now really only think 3 years ahead. But this year has been so weird and so strange with Trump and Brexit and all of the political changes that as a futurist, as a strategy person, we're having a big crisis right now in that everything we thought that would happen in 2016 did not happen. And everything we thought would not happen did happen. And so...
Okay, thank you very much for your answer and your speech. Thanks, dear Mr. Ben Hammersley, and invite dear Muhammed Akgürük to present his prize. Değerli konuşmacımıza plaketini takdim etmek üzere İSPAK AŞ Genel Müdürü Sayın Muhammed Akgürük'ü sahneye davet ediyoruz efendim. Buyurunuz. Please wait.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh. Oop, oop. Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's so cool.